Who was Aristotle? Aristotle was born circa 384 BCE. He was born in Stagira, Chalcidice, Greece. He died circa 322 BCE. Aristotle was an ancient Greek philosopher and scientist who is still considered one of the greatest thinkers in politics, psychology, and ethics, and one of the greatest intellectual figures of Western history. He was known, in his time, as the man who knew everything and later simply as the philosopher. When he was 18, Aristotle was sent to Athens to study at Plato's academy, where he remained for the next 20 years as Plato's pupil and colleague. In 338 BCE, he was hired by Philip II, king of Macedon, as tutor for his son, Alexander the Great. Through Alexander the Great, Aristotle's works were spread throughout the known world of the time, influencing other philosophies and providing a foundation for the development of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. In 335, Aristotle founded his own school, the Lyceum, in Athens, the Peripatetic school of philosophy, and the Aristotelian tradition, where he spent most of the rest of his life studying, teaching, and writing. His writings cover many subjects including physics, biology, medicine, mathematics, zoology, metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, poetry, theater, music, rhetoric, psychology, linguistics, economics, politics, government, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of science. Aristotle wrote an estimated 200 works, most in the form of notes and manuscript drafts, from which approximately only 31 survived and are still in circulation. Most date to Aristotle's time at the Lyceum. Aristotle was naturally curious about all aspects of the human condition and natural world and systematically studied whatever subject came to his attention, learned it to his satisfaction, and then tried to make it comprehensible and meaningful through philosophical interpretation. Some of his most notable works include Nicomachian Ethics, Poetics, Metaphysics, Poetics, and Prior Analytics. The surviving works of Aristotle are grouped into 4 categories. The Organon is a set of writings that provide a logical toolkit for use in any philosophical or scientific investigation. Next come Aristotle's theoretical works, most famously his treatises on animals, parts of animals, movement of animals, etc., cosmology. He successfully identified more than 600 species of wildlife. The Physics, a basic inquiry about the nature of matter and change, and the Metaphysics, a quasi-theological investigation of existence itself. Metaphysics. Aristotle's Metaphysics, written quite literally after his Physics, studies the nature of existence. He called metaphysics the first philosophy, or wisdom. His primary area of focus was being qua being, which examined what can be said about being based on what it is, not because of any particular qualities it may have. In metaphysics, Aristotle also muses on causation, form, matter, and even a logic-based argument for the existence of God. Aristotle clarified the distinction between matter and form. To Aristotle, matter was the physical substance of things, while form was the unique nature of a thing that gave it its identity. Aristotle could never accept Plato's theory of forms, nor did he believe in positing the unseen as an explanation for the observable world when one could work from what one could see backwards toward a first cause. In his Physics and Metaphysics, Aristotle claims the first cause in the universe is the prime mover, that which moves all else but is itself unmoved. To Aristotle, this made more sense than the realm of forms. The existence of the prime mover could be proven, at least theoretically, because some force had to have set life in motion at some point in the past, and this force, whatever it consisted of, he designated the unmoved mover or prime mover. His reasoning in this would later be adopted by Jewish, Christian, and Muslim theologians and contributed to these religions' concept of God. To Aristotle, rhetoric is the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. He identified 3 main methods of rhetoric: ethos, ethics, pathos, emotional, and logos, logic. He also broke rhetoric into types of speeches: epideictic, ceremonial, forensic, judicial, and deliberative, where the audience is required to reach a verdict. His groundbreaking work in this field earned him the nickname the Father of Rhetoric. In rhetoric, Aristotle observes and analyzes public speaking with scientific rigor in order to teach readers how to be more effective speakers. Aristotle believed rhetoric was essential in politics and law and helped defend truth and justice. Good rhetoric, Aristotle believed, could educate people and encourage them to consider both sides of a debate. Aristotle's work explored how to construct an argument and maximize its effect, as well as fallacious reasoning. Poetics is a scientific study of writing and poetry where Aristotle observes, analyzes, and defines mostly tragedy and epic poetry. Compared to philosophy, which presents ideas, poetry is an imitative use of language, rhythm, and harmony that represents objects and events in the world, Aristotle posited. His book explores the foundation of story-making, including character development, plot, and storyline. He argues that creative endeavors like poetry and theater provides catharsis, or the beneficial purging of emotions through art. In politics, Aristotle examined human behavior in the context of society and government. Aristotle believed the purpose of government was make it possible for citizens to achieve virtue and happiness. Intended to help guide statesmen and rulers, politics explores, among other themes, how and why cities come into being, the roles of citizens and politicians, wealth and the class system, the purpose of the political system, types of governments and democracies, and the roles of slavery and women in the household and society. Aristotle's claim to be the founder of logic rests primarily on the categories, the de interpretatione, and the prior analytics, which deal respectively with words, propositions, and syllogisms. The organon, Latin for instrument, is a series of Aristotle's works on logic, what he himself would call analytics. The set of 6 books includes categories, on interpretation, prior analytics, posterior analytics, topics, and on sophistical refutations. The organon contains Aristotle's work on syllogisms, from the Greek syllogismos, or conclusions, a form of reasoning in which a conclusion is drawn from 2 assumed premises. In prior analytics, Aristotle explains the syllogism as a discourse in which, certain things having been supposed, something different from the things supposed results of necessity because these things are so. Aristotle defined the main components of reasoning in terms of inclusive and exclusive relationships. These sorts of relationships were visually graphed in the future through the use of Venn diagrams. In Aristotle's logic, the basic ingredients of reasoning are given in terms of inclusion and exclusion relations generally. A deduction, syllogism, according to Aristotle, is a valid or acceptable argument. More exactly, a deduction is an argument in which when certain things are laid down something else follows of necessity in virtue of their being so. Every Greek is human. Every human is mortal. Therefore, every Greek is mortal. The pattern of argument exhibited in the example above can be represented in the schematic proposition, if A belongs to every B, and B belongs to every C, A belongs to every C. Additional examples are the following: every Greek is human. No human is immortal. Therefore, no Greek is immortal. Some animal is a dog. Some dog is white. Therefore, every animal is white. From late antiquity, triads of these different kinds were called moods of the syllogism. The 2 moods illustrated above exhibit an important difference. The first is a valid argument, and the second is an invalid argument, having true premises and a false conclusion. An argument is valid only if its form is such that it will never lead from true premises to a false conclusion. Aristotle sought to determine which forms result in valid inferences. Aristotle's syllogistic is a remarkable achievement. It is a systematic formulation of an important part of logic. Aristotle's writings show that even he realized that there is more to logic than syllogistic. The de interpretatione, like the prior analytics, deals mainly with general propositions beginning with every, no, or some. But its main concern is not to link these propositions to each other in syllogisms but to explore the relations of compatibility and incompatibility between them. Every swan is white and no swan is white. Clearly cannot both be true. Aristotle calls such pairs of propositions contraries. They can, however, both be false, if as is the case some swans are white and some are not. Every swan is white and some swan is not white. Like the former pair, cannot both be true, but on the assumption that there are such things as swans, they cannot both be false either. If one of them is true, the other is false, and if one of them is false, the other is true. Aristotle calls such pairs of propositions contradictories. Categories. This treatise begins by dividing the things that are said, the expressions of speech, into those that are simple and those that are complex. The categories are intended as a classification of both the kinds of expression that may function as a predicate in a proposition and of the kinds of extralinguistic entity such expressions may signify. The categories identifies 10 different ways in which simple expressions may signify. These are the categories that give the treatise its name. To introduce the categories, Aristotle employs a heterogeneous set of expressions, including nouns, e.g., substance, verbs, e.g., wearing, and interrogatives, e.g., where, or how big. By the Middle Ages it had become customary to refer to each category by a more or less abstract noun, substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, posture, vesture, activity, and passivity. In Nicomachian Ethics, which is believed to have been named in tribute to Aristotle's son, Nicomachius, Aristotle prescribed a moral code of conduct for what he called good living. He asserted that good living to some degree defied the more restrictive laws of logic, since the real world poses circumstances that can present a conflict of personal values. That said, it was up to the individual to reason cautiously while developing his or her own judgment. Eudemian Ethics is another of Aristotle's major treatises on the behavior and judgment that constitute good living. On happiness, in his treatises on ethics, Aristotle aimed to discover the best way to live life and give it meaning, the supreme good for man, in his words, which he determined was the pursuit of happiness. Our happiness is not a state but an activity, and it's determined by our ability to live a life that enables us to use and develop our reason. While bad luck can affect happiness, a truly happy person, he believed, learns to cultivate habits and behaviors that help him, or her, to keep bad luck in perspective. Aristotle was a teleologist, an individual who believes in end causes and final purposes in life, and believed that everything and everyone in the world had a purpose for existing and, further, these final purposes could be ascertained from observation of the known world. Aristotle believed that the final purpose for human existence was happiness, eudaimonia, literally, to be possessed of a good spirit, and this happiness could be realized by maintaining a virtuous life which developed one's arete, personal excellence. A person's arete would enable them to see what had to be done in any given situation and be able to do it. Aristotle also defined what he called the golden mean. Living a moral life, Aristotle believed, was the ultimate goal. Doing so means approaching every ethical dilemma by finding a mean between living to excess and living deficiently, taking into account an individual's needs and circumstances. The golden mean provides a control which acts to correct one's behavior. In his work on the soul, Aristotle addresses the issue of memory as fact, claiming that one's memories are impressions but not reliable records of what really happened. A memory assumes a different value as one undergoes new experiences, and so one's memory of an unpleasant event will change. Aristotle advocated moderation in all things in order to attain this good in life, which, ultimately, was a happiness no person or set of circumstances could take or diminish. Aristotle maintained that a man becomes just by performing just acts and self-controlled by performing acts of self-control. Nicomachian Ethics I.1105b.10. This self-control was exemplified by his concept of the golden mean. Aristotle writes, in regard to pleasures and pains, the mean is self-control and the excess is self-indulgence. In taking and giving money, the mean is generosity, the excess and deficiency are extravagance and stinginess. In these vices, excess and deficiency work in opposite ways. An extravagant man exceeds in spending and is deficient in taking, while a stingy man exceeds in taking and is deficient in spending. A reflection on wisdom, the ignorant man pronounces, the wise man questions and reflects. Even today we hear many ignorant people who think that the ones who shout the loudest or the one who show the greatest confidence when speaking are the wisest ones. However, while some indulge and bask in their supposed wisdom, others question, reflect and investigate. We could almost see this quote as a kind of premonition of the scientific methods that would develop later. Don't claim anything until you are certain that what you are saying is true. That is why some people say that the ignorant speak using the mouths of those who really know. Know yourself. I consider the one who conquers his desires to be braver than the one who conquers his enemies, since the hardest victory is victory over oneself. It is strange that, even though we are a fairly spiritual species, human beings tend to know so little about themselves. Sometimes it seems that we refuse to delve inside ourselves for fear of what we may find. We look at our image in the mirror, but hardly ever spend any time looking beyond that image. We all have things in our lives that are difficult to accept. By doing so, we would be taking a step towards what Aristotle called the victory over oneself. A long and complex task, but a necessity if we want to enjoy that feeling of well-being that gives the balance between our inner being and the image we project to others. What is intelligence? Intelligence consists not only in knowledge, but also in the ability to apply knowledge in practice. Again, we observe Aristotle pronouncing phrases very similar to what would later be known as scientific procedures. We can have plenty of knowledge, but if something can't be clearly demonstrated and practically applied, is it actually of any use? This quote of Aristotle thus reinforces many of the complaints of students in today's schools. They ask themselves what the point of studying is, and it's rare to find a teacher who can explain how they can get out of that abstract world of letters and numbers and get into the real world. Don't forget that a practical explanation can be one of the greatest motivations that someone can have to learn. The true friendship. Some believe that simply wanting to be friends is enough, as if wishing someone health is enough to be healthy. Is this one of Aristotle's most complex phrases? Is wanting a friendship not enough to actually have it? Undoubtedly, friendship is a two-way thing. Even so, wanting the friendship must be the first step towards forging it. Perhaps the Greek sage refers to the need for the friendship to come from the depths of our being. Friendship is something spiritual. After all, despite Aristotle being one of the most pragmatic philosophers of the ancient world, in his time they believed fervently in the existence of the soul. The value of effort. There is only happiness where there is virtue and serious effort, because life is not a game. Undoubtedly, this is one of the phrases of Aristotle that contains a greater meaning. Little is achieved without effort. For the Greeks, being virtuous was a serious and necessary issue. In fact, it considered that only the most virtuous and righteous should get to govern the people. Undoubtedly, this quote is very valid today. Maybe with effort you won't achieve what you are hoping for, but without it you will almost certainly not get it. Thus, a virtuous, educated, understanding and empathetic attitude will take you on a much more pleasant road through life. Aristotle contributed to every branch of knowledge available in his time. In ethics, he also famously explored the difference between voluntary actions and involuntary actions, encouraging people to try to fill their lives with as many voluntary actions as possible in order to achieve the greatest happiness. His Poetics addresses the concerns of the state, which Aristotle sees as an organic development natural to any community of human beings. The state is not a static structure imposed on people but a dynamic, living entity created by those who then live under its rules. Aristotle's Poetics introduced concepts such as mimesis, imitation of reality in art, and catharsis, a purging of strong emotion, to literary criticism as well as the creative arts. His observations on poetic and rhetorical form would continue to be taught as objective truths on the subject up through the period of the European Renaissance. Aristotle's writings, like Plato's, have influenced virtually every avenue of human knowledge for the past 2,000 years. His Nicomachian Ethics, written for his son, Nicomachius, as a guide to good living, is still consulted as a philosophical touchstone in the study of ethics. He contributed to the understanding of physics, created the field and the study of what is known as metaphysics, wrote extensively on natural science and politics, and his Poetics remains a classic of literary criticism. Many scholars, philosophers, and thinkers over the past 2,000 years have argued with, dismissed, ignored, questioned, and even debunked Aristotle's theories, but none have argued that his influence was not vast and deeply penetrating, establishing schools of thought and creating disciplines taken for granted in the present as having always just existed. Aristotle's philosophies and ethics have been very influential. Many logicians state that Aristotle produced the definitive work on logic and there is no sense of even changing it, although this has now changed. Nevertheless, his ideas of logic and ethics are now central to many philosophies that subsequently formed the foundations of Western ideals. Modern philosophy developed later by Kant often sees Aristotle as a core foundation for their thinking, particularly as it placed such emphasis on ethics and virtue and the tenets that are required to develop these.